We're not going to change the rules now.
I agree.
Nor are we going to go, well, 100 days isn't fair. But it's been fair for everybody else. Oh, it's right there to your left. It's been fair for everyone else. Why can't it be fair for her
It's dope. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
And, you know, she did the, what was it, today is Thursday, Wednesday, Tuesday. She was at Kentwood. Yesterday she was at Kentwood.
Nice. With
all the chiefs of staff. Migraine, dude. I can't talk.
I know, babe. I'm
with
sorry.
all of the, with her transition team.
Mm-hmm. And all her deputies.
And deputies and everybody.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's what you do, you know, but people in South Shore would like to see her a little bit more, I think.
That's fair.
And, you know, just Chicago's a nice, big, beautiful place. And finally, God save the Queen. JD Trekker.
You were angry.
Holy smoke.
Okay, I'm not going to say anything for the next half an hour.
Have been a piece of work.
Got it, baby.
I love you.
What's up, Jamie?
See you, baby.
Oh, my God. Hey, that's not all yours, man.
It's so all mine. I
No,
mean,
it's
you
not.
better talk fast.
I'm to talk fast. The reason you eat is because of me. I turned you.
You totally did.
I'm going to walk
Eat
past
the cake.
you. I'm going to walk past you while you doing it. All right, I'm going to play this song real quick. And should I? Yeah, because I hear the foil moving. I don't want any more. All right. Gosh.
I'm going to shove this. It'll be down my neck and this fast.
Don't radio eat that. Take your time.
Oh my God! What kind of bread is that?
I don't know. Good kind.
Oh,
It's that Bridgeport bread.
I'm telling you.
Here's Earth, Wind, and Fire. Evil, which is what she was getting before that silver package came. Earth, Wind, and Fire. News from the service entrance, the radio show.
That looks
Daniel
amazing.
Epstein is next.
Jesus.
Give me the bag.
I love this man.
You too.
That looks delicious.
It does,
Yeah,
right?
they basically feed me.
Oh, and it's a lotes too.
I might have to stop by and grab some after I leave here.
Brother, I didn't know this was hot. It's nice to meet you.
Hey, nice to meet you
it's
too.
It's really nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Gabriel Piemonte put me up on you.
Oh,
But
love
I had
that.
already knew about you because Michilla, that same day, like an hour before, goes, we're going to have Daniel Epstein on next week. I'm like, word. And then I go on Facebook and Gabriel's like, Mario, you really need to try to get me Daniel Epstein. So I'm glad that this happened.
Well, I'm glad good people are recommending me.
Yes.
Do you want half of it?
No.
Are you
fine.
sure?
Yeah. But thank you so much.
Oh, you're going to eat it all after all that
Jesus.
stuff.
I was just being polite.
You're really hoping that was going to be my answer.
I was really hoping you were going to say no.
What is this, brioche bread?
God
pretzel
damn.
roll? It's like a pretzel roll.
Yeah, it's magic. So Jamie is the founder of Cold Prosperity, and that's the head honcho.
Gotcha.
And the head chef.
This is an amazing studio.
Mm-hmm.
I have never had short rib burger before.
Is that what that is?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is crazy. With avocado.
Oh my God. And the cheese is good too.
Now, he sources everything out, but I don't think he has a cow on his recipe.
It's like a commercial for wherever you got this from.
It's him. No, this is from his house.
Are you serious?
Mm-hmm. He feeds it like he's literally, he pays me in food.
Pretty much.
Last week it was ribeye tacos. Remember that?
I do.
Oh my God. I'd never had such tender beef in my life. It's so good.
Short rib is way underrated. Short rib is so good.
You having a good day?
Having a great day. Yeah.
Campaign trail's treating you all right?
Yeah. Things are coming into place.
Yeah?
Yeah. Setting up dominoes and,
Knocking them down.
hopefully. We're blowing on them.
Mm-hmm.
They're wavering. So how are things with you?
Good. Everything's good.
I'm streaming, by the way.
Oh, right. Oh, I'm so glad you said that. Getting ready for back to school.
Yeah.
And I managed to get Judge James T. Derrico slated.
I saw.
Which is a big deal.
Yeah.
Because he's an outsider. You know what I mean? He's not a regular... he's not on the political scene.
Yeah.
So even his appointment was a little bit revolutionary. Shout out to Justice Tice.
Hey.
But now we got to do the work of making sure everybody knows him.
Yeah.
So it's a ton of that.
Yeah.
It's the CFL luncheon yesterday. Like it's just
He's got the right people in his corner.
rounds. I hope so. I'm working on it. There's still people who are like, who is he? I've never seen him. And I'm like, that's the point.
Yeah.
That's what we want.
Yeah.
We want people that you haven't, that don't just hang out.
Yeah.
Let's get some people with some skills and talent. What are you trying to say?
Speaking my language.
Please don't eat on the air, Michilla. Don't do like
Oh,
me.
I'm so gonna chew. Like,
I'm the
it's about
king
to
of
be
it.
on and popping.
I am the king of
You
doing
chew
it.
on air?
No, I eat on the air, but you don't know. Because I've done this long enough where I figured out how to do it and not be exposed for it. Filling food. Just like, mic off, just kind of go away. Gotta be quick. Well, it doesn't look like I'm in any more trouble. That's
Good
good.
Lord.
Yeah, this is good, man.
I keep putting it down.
Oh, wow, they
I'm
just
gonna get
issued
ready.
an arrest warrant for Boogie Cousins. Huh.
Really?
Yeah.
For what?
Misdemeanor domestic abuse.
Hey.
I didn't know that there was a misdemeanor for being rude. You can't hit a woman, and it'd be a misdemeanor. LA County, man. Glad I don't live there. That might have put me over the edge. Hold on.
It's overwhelming.
WLP-LP Chicago 105.5 FM. This is Lumpin' Radio, and it's news from the Service Interest Radio Show, and the Trekker Kitchen has completely lost their mind. You okay?
You lost me. Yeah. I'm just gonna sit here and eat my sandwich.
Nope, gotta work.
Okay.
But see, this is what I'm talking about. You
I'm
have
sure.
to, I know. That's what I just said.
Oh,
I know
man.
what I'm doing.
Okay. Let me back on the mic.
Years of let me put you back on. I'm sorry. Years of
I swallowed.
Years of
Oh.
yeah. There's so much. There.
Let's keep him.
All right. Joining us in studio, the pleasure we have of having a candidate for Illinois Supreme Court, who's also going to talk to us about justice reform, social justice reform, and Daniel Epstein is here. Hello, sir.
Hello. Thanks for having me on.
Thank
I'm
you
great.
For being here. I'm glad
great.
you're here. This is nice. You got to see us in our environment.
That's right. I love your environment. The studio is amazing.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
a little background on Daniel. He's, I would say, you've got to be the youngest candidate,
I'm
at
the
least this cycle, but
in this
maybe
cycle.
ever?
So, in fact, actually, no. So, I'm the youngest candidate in this cycle by far. And if I won, I think I'd be the youngest justice in 100 years.
See?
But if this were the first Illinois Supreme Court, I'd probably be the oldest justice on the bench.
See there, Mario? You're learning history.
Wow.
Yeah.
How does that work exactly? That you'd be the oldest?
It used to be the case that our bench was quite young. That and over time, the age of the bench creeped up slowly. But for a long time, young people were our Supreme Court justices in this state.
When a voter who just went through two really excruciating elections back to back, and then an even more elongated election here in Chicago, when you talk to somebody and say, "Listen, I'm running for Illinois Supreme Court," I imagine the reaction at first is kind of a visceral reaction, like, "Oh God, I got to vote again." But how does the way you're doing this differ from the way it's been done in the past?
Yeah. So most judicial candidates are their spiel goes something like this: I've been a judge or an attorney for X number of years. I'm super fair, like really, really fair. Like I'm the fairest. And
in
then
all the land.
Right, in all the land. And then they go in one of two directions. It's either I'm really compassionate or I'm really tough on crime.
Yep.
And here's who endorses me, and so please vote for me. And it's kind of that condensed version in large part because there's an ethical prohibition against making statements that would commit you or appear to commit you to how you would decide cases, controversies, or issues that are likely to come before the court. That's the quote, right? And in most cases, judicial candidates view that as their entire role. And in most cases, it is their entire role. But when it comes to the Illinois Supreme Court, it is not their entire role. So they decide the biggest cases in the state. That's what they do. But what they can do is much, much bigger because they write all the rules of procedure, all the rules of evidence, all the rules of ethics. They even determine things like design and architectural standards of courthouses, which plays a big role in access to justice for undocumented people and trans people and people with mobility challenges. They have a role to play in the data infrastructure of the court and who gets to be a lawyer and how and attorney discipline and on and on and on. They're like the chief executives of the justice system. And so even though they can't talk about cases just like any other judicial candidate can't talk about cases, they can talk about rules and rule reform. And that's the kind of novel thing that I'm doing. And when I talk about that, and the way in which those kind of ignored rules really impact people's lives and the outcomes of our decisions, I think people have a really positive response.
When we talk about the current administration, the Trump administration, and the wide swath of the wide swath of judicial hires that President Trump has approved. The state of Illinois and other states tend to be like, that on the federal level, you do that, but none of that stuff is going to apply here. We're not going to allow. We're a sanctuary city in Chicago, and I believe a sanctuary state. How does the Illinois Supreme Court view, in your view, how does the Illinois, or how have they been doing in terms of watching these hires that Trump has made, and how much of an effect does that have on what happens here in Illinois in our judicial system?
Yeah, so there's a huge effect, and here's for certain cases. For certain cases, not so much. For some others, big effect, and here's why. There are some cases that can get appealed from the Illinois system into the federal system. Appealed might not be the right word, but moved from one to the other. So let me give you an example from one of the cases that I had. I had a case that we took to the Supreme Court of the United States, and it was a case that started as a murder charge here in Illinois. It was a bench trial, meaning there was no jury. It was a judge, and that judge convicted my client based on no evidence. Right? The state brought evidence. The judge looked at the evidence. He said, "This evidence doesn't make any sense. It's bad. Doesn't make sense." Right? But here's what I think happened. And then he made up a story out of whole cloth and said, "I think the victim was a drug dealer. I think the defendant was a drug dealer, and I think the defendant killed the victim out of competitive vim." Big problem because there was no evidence for that. Right? So my client, and this is before we had the case, he appealed to the Illinois Appellate Court. He then where he lost. He then where he represented himself. He then appealed to the Illinois Supreme Court, who wouldn't even take his case. Right? So if it were just the state system encapsulated, then that would have been the end of it. But he had the right to then do something called a habeas petition to the federal courts, to the federal district courts, which are overseen by judges who are appointed by the president. His case then went to what's called the Northern District of Illinois, a federal trial court here in Chicago, where he lost. And then he appealed to the federal appellate court, the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. That's when we got the case. We won. And then the state petitioned to bring it up to the Supreme Court of the United States, where they did something called a dig. Like they said, basically, we accepted the case. We shouldn't have accepted the case. Take the last ruling, a ruling in which we won. So we helped release this guy. But the interesting thing, to answer your question, is those people who are getting appointed by the president are the ones who get to decide whether that habeas petition lives or dies or succeeds or fails. And so those people really do have a huge impact on litigants here in Illinois, even in cases that start in our state system.
Last one for me, for now. Your potential appointment to the Illinois Supreme Court. If this should happen, what are some of the things that you are looking to be able to do to utilize this reformation of the justice system here in Illinois? Particularly, I know Kim Foxx just recently, as recent as 2 days ago, talked about the mass expungements that are going to take place for the marijuana convictions and stuff. Are there certain things that you're eyeballing that you would like to see happen? Yeah. And if you get in there, what are some of those things? Yeah, absolutely. So we're dead focused on rules reform, and because you mentioned sanctuary cities before, I'll talk about my idea for sanctuary courts, because I'll describe it with a story. So some time ago, a few years ago, I talked to a group of people who were laid off from a factory here in Cook County, and they were all undocumented. Mm-hmm. And I asked them, how many of you have experienced wage theft? Your employer stealing your wages. Every single hand went up. Right? And then I asked them, how many of you have sued the people who stole your wages? And every single hand went down. And the reason is they won't set foot in our state civil courts because they're afraid that ICE is there to detain and then deport them. Right? They don't have the privilege of setting foot in our state civil courts. They are not sanctuaries for them. And that's a subsidy to wage thieves and abusers and people like that, right? And so what we want to be able to do is give them the ability to bring cases against the people who abuse them and steal their wages without having to set foot in court. We can't tell federal agents not to come to our courts and do what they're doing, but we can say, people in our community can bring cases without setting foot in court. We can do it using technology, the same technology that I'm live streaming on my phone right now, right?
Other jurisdictions have already put this in place. You show up on a webcam in a virtual appearance. It's much more convenient, by the way. You don't have to worry about whether the judge is going to call your case on time so that your child caretaker is, handling business or whatever. We can make it more convenient, more just, more humane, and we should. So I want to do sanctuary courts. I also want to end cash bail. And that's a hot topic right now, including with the state's attorney's office.
I support that 1,000,000%.
Yeah.
Talk real quick about the elimination of cash bail.
Yeah.
Because I've heard this, but I'm not as clear on it as I should be.
Yeah. So there's a time between when you get arrested and when you go to trial. And where you spend that time is dictated by the court. Oftentimes it's a bond court. And they have to make a twofold decision. The first is, or they're supposed to make a twofold decision. The first is, are you safe to return to the community? If not, game over. You're spending that time in jail. You're not going to get to return to the community. If so, then there's a second question. And that second question is, how much money do you have to put down for us to make sure that you'll come back to court? Collateral, right? Mm-hmm. That's the cash bail part of it, right? Here's the big problem. Those two questions have become conflated, such that sometimes people, judges will say, if it's a really serious crime, I'm just going to put a higher bail amount so that it's harder for you to make that bail. That's a big problem, because what it ultimately means is dangerous people who can afford bail make bail and go back out onto the street, right? And on the flip side of that, people who are safe to return to the community who can't make bail, who are presumed innocent, and who, they end up lingering in jail even though they would be fine to return to the community. And so there's, one thing that I think is a little bit, not totally missing from the conversation, but I want to emphasize it, is cash bail does not make us safer. That's kind of been part of this push against the elimination of cash bail, that it puts us in greater danger. That's not true. Cash bail puts us in greater danger because it means that people who are not safe to return to the community can pay to return to the community.
That's a good point.
That's not how it should be.
That's exactly right. But also, I think what it does is have people lingering in jail. And sometimes it's, $1,000. For certain communities, that's an unsurmountable amount, which means then you lose whatever job you have. You could lose your children. When you come out, everything is exponentially harder. Yeah. Your car gets left on the street, and then you've got a whole bunch of tickets, and then your license is expired, and then any driving you do leaves you vulnerable to getting pulled over and put back in jail. But all the data that I've seen demonstrates that bail doesn't make people less likely or more likely to commit crimes. I think people who want to commit crimes are going to commit crimes, right? Not, hey, I got $500 at the county courthouse. Right. I'm not going to do anything bad from now on, Right. And so we really need to just rethink this. Since the bail reform has happened, it's something like 40% of the people that were held in Cook County are no longer there. And so the Cook County jail was overcrowded and was completely inappropriate. And we've been able to save money there and, again, be more humane. But also, I think when we think about bail, it's not supposed to be a punishment, as you said, because those people are innocent.
That's right. They're presumed innocent, yeah. That's right.
I know this it may not be a state issue, but one of the things that a lot of people have a strong complaint about is the booting system. I know that Mayor Lightfoot has made mention of that. I'm wondering, because cities privatize things like parking, water, and other things, is there any way that on a state level that the state could have a little bit more say in things like that? I know it's kind of hard to tell a city how to run itself, and it's even harder to try to act like the landlord of the city. But just curious, is that a thing that on a state level that would be something that may come up in the Supreme Court, you think?
It's possible, and because of that, I can't really say too much for the reasons that I was talking about before.
But
what I can tell you,
all the juicy stuff.
That's right. But I am interested. Have you seen the things that they've switched for the boots? Those, like the windscreen covers. It's like a giant yellow. It looks like a giant yellow pizza box that they put on your windshield.
Yes.
Those. What are those?
No.
What are they made of?
What are they made of? Are they going to be hood opted? Because and get a boot off.
Yeah.
Get a boot off. I'm sure. Get a new windshield.
I got a
They'll
guy.
be just
I got a guy.
driving around with windshields in their cars. Put the whole new windshield on there.
When is the election for you?
March 17th, 2020. It's St. Patrick's Day.
Holy cow. On St. Patrick's Day?
On St. Patrick's Day.
When you win,
Yeah.
I'm going to need you to do me a favor. All right? I want you to put this into effect some kind of way. Election Day should be held in the summer.
Okay.
When school is out,
Yeah.
there's no, I need a babysitter, none of that stuff.
Yeah.
Election Day should be held when the weather is, if not this summer, later in the spring. It's in Chicago in particular.
Yeah.
Spring lasted till June this year, right? Let's do the election right around my birthday, maybe, or your birthday, even better.
Great.
Right? And then
a lot of people are gone in the summer, but I hear ya.
Or can we start implementing the way we vote for like American Idol, where we would be able to use text
4777.
Think about it though. I mean, and I'm not trying to make light of it. I'm being really serious. Everybody has a mobile device.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Yep.
If a person is of voting age, they should be able, if they can't or won't go to a polling place, they should be able to vote. I promise you, if I start a poll on Twitter about America's favorite chicken sandwich, everybody and their mother is voting. Why can't we use that same? We've got technology to use for things like that. And I would hope that in the vision of the state, they would say, that might not be the worst idea.
Yeah.
I imagine people who are using the technology like you, that would benefit you.
Yeah.
And let's do it. Come on, let's go.
Yeah.
Let's get it going.
Yeah. Well, yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask one more question that's actually appropriate for a Supreme Court?
Go on. I thought that was pretty appropriate.
He's not the Wizard of Oz, right? He's not going to change how elections are done, whatever. He's not running for the Wiz.
I'm voting for Dan tonight. I want to go home and put it set out of text.
Now you made me forget my question.
No, I didn't.
What do you think about judges being elected in general? Can you talk about that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, what I can tell
the
you.
whole process that we experience. I'm not sure that I personally, I don't know that it's ensuring us a diverse and wonderful judiciary.
Yeah, well, let me. My views on it are kind of changing a little bit, and so the short answer is, let me report back after I go through this thing, because I want to see it play out and kind of get an intimate experience with it. But here's the view that I started with, which was one from there's a region of study called comparative law, and in comparative law. And actually, this is kind of a tool that they use in evolutionary biology too. But in order to figure out whether a trait is important, you look across cultures to see whether it exists in multiple cultures, right? Mm-hmm. And that same thing goes with the law. In order to find out if a law is really important, you find out if that law exists in multiple cultures and societies, right? So here's an example. Not every country agrees that you should drive on the right side. Some countries say you should drive on the left side. And that's a signal that, the side that you choose probably isn't that important, right? But every country says you got to drive on one side or the other. They choose a side, right?
Right.
So the fact that we have to choose a side signals that across cultures signals that it's important. The fact that different cultures have different ideas about which side is right probably signals that it's not all that important, right? So with respect to selecting judges, different cultures select judges in different ways. Different societies do it in different ways. In Illinois, and different states do it in different ways. In Illinois, we elect our judges. At the federal level, we appoint our judges. In some countries in Europe, it's just like a normal career trajectory. Like you go to school to be a judge, you graduate, and then you're a judge, right? And that signals to me that maybe, or signaled to me that maybe there's not such a huge, it's not all that important, right? The important thing is that you select judges, not how you select judges. But that said, having been in this process for a little bit, I'm getting less convinced of that.
Yep. I'm going to talk to you on March 18th.
Yeah.
And we'll have some cocktails and really do a deep dive.
Yeah. I'll either be thrilled with the system or really hate the system at that point.
You'll be ready to set it on fire.
That's
it's fine.
I first thank you, of course, for being on and for coming down to the studio. How do you feel within the whole running thing? How's your constitution at the moment?
Good.
That's a good question. I think it's also interesting because Daniel's the youngest candidate. He's talking about radical ideas. Like he is not your typical candidate, which is why I really wanted to bring him here and have you talk with him, Mario, because I think even your candidacy speaks volumes for what's happening in the nation, what's happening in Chicago. There's just people are getting more involved, and people are having the audacity to not go the regular route and be political and wait your turn and kiss butts. See?
This might be on Weekend Review, so that's the the hallmark show of this place.
That's right.
It's
And
like
I'm
our
keeping it clean.
It's like our 60 Minutes.
You're welcome.
This will get edited out.
Yeah.
That's fine.
So, can you just speak to how you're feeling and why you jumped in and who the hell you think you are? Dang it, I did it again.
No, that's okay.
Okay, that one's okay?
That's
Okay.
legit.
Who do you think you are?
Yeah. Well, I feel great. Thanks for asking, and in large part because the day-to-day experience of interacting with people out in the community has been extremely positive. People are, I heard one of the pieces of advice I got early on was from someone who was in the political sphere for some time, who was fairly successful, was don't underestimate how hard it's going to be to get people to care about this race at all, period, right? And I was like, okay, well, I guess we'll see. And some people say, these judges' races, people are totally apathetic, right? And I got to tell you, that's not my experience. When I go and talk to folks, they're not apathetic. Like, I'm telling them stories, and I'll tell you the story about how I got into this race in the first place in a second, but I tell them these stories about issues in our justice system. And they're disturbing. They're really disturbing stories, including the one I'll tell you in a minute. And they're not persuaded that our justice system is broken. And here's why. They already believe it, right? Mm-hmm. They already are there. And the really interesting thing is that they really get on board and they support us. They're like, I'll vote for you. I'll get my family to vote for you. I'll donate to you, right? They do that when we tell them that we can fix it. It doesn't take a big imagination to see that our justice system is important and that the judges who oversee it are important. People understand that. People even understand that the system is broken in many ways. What they haven't heard is that we can fix it and how. That's what I'm bringing. And I think that sets me aside in many ways. And I think it's energizing people. So I feel really good when these people, one, feel validated. They're like, I knew something was wrong. Now I'm like, hey, it's this. Mm-hmm. And oh, by the way, we can fix it. Mm-hmm. That feels really good. Mm-hmm. But I'll tell you the story if you're up for it about how I got into this case or into this campaign. So I was serving clients across the country, including in the Supreme Court of the United States, the highest court in our nation, that case that I was telling you about a second ago, and got to see how different jurisdictions did justice. And came back to Cook County to defend a guy accused of attempt murder, and got to see how we do justice. And in our state, this is how it went down. DNA was at issue in this case, and my job was to learn everything I could about DNA and to mount our defense. And so I read everything I could get my hands on, and we hired a forensic scientist, and I interviewed the state's DNA analyst. And what we found was that the state was using a faulty DNA machine. And that's pretty disturbing. See, if you watch like Law & Order or CSI or whatever, these DNA machines look like the Wizard of Oz, right?
Yeah.
Or some, magic,
There's
right?
beakers and stuff and like fire, right?
Right.
They all have lab coats on and whatnot.
Everybody looks like, what's his face on NCIS? It used to be on The Man from U.N.C.L.E., but I digress. Please continue.
So, but these machines are fallible, and they're complicated, and inside they have something called a spectral filter, and you need to calibrate it. And if you don't, you can get something called pull up, pull down, bleed through, false positives and false negatives. That's what was going on here, and that's scary because who knows how many people this was used against, right? But I was optimistic because I said, we're going to go to trial. I'll take the DNA analyst who failed to calibrate the machine, and I'll cross-examine him. We'll expose that issue. We'll expose the bad machine. I got into this business to make the world a better place, one case at a time. That's how it's supposed to work, right? And I do a little bit more research, and I find out that in Illinois, our forensic labs actually get extra funding when they produce an analysis that ends in conviction.
How about that?
Well, okay.
How about that?
That's comforting.
I do a little bit more research, and I find out that in Illinois, our courts get extra funding when they convict. Right?
See there?
Not surprised. Look at my skin. I know.
We know the fix is in, but I think what Daniel's saying, what he said previously is the point, right? Like, oh yeah, there's that. I just thought racism, right?
You would think
it is racism, but it's like it's how they line everything up.
It's institutional racism.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's about the rules, right? And the story goes on because because we didn't end up getting to go and put this guy on the witness stand. We didn't get to talk about the systemic funding issues or the broken machine, because what ended up happening was our client was faced with a choice. He was signaled through something called Illinois Supreme Court Rule 402 that if he asserted his constitutional right to a trial, he would be sentenced to 70-something years if he were found guilty, right? It's through a 402.
Automatically.
Hearing. It's not automatic, but what happens is you go back into judges' chambers under something called a 402 hearing, and the state kind of previews the case that it's going to put forth, and you preview the case that you're going to put forth, and the judge previews what the sentence would be if he were to convict, right? And in this case, the recommended that he said, if I were to convict, I think an appropriate sentence would be 70-something years. And then you back out into the hall, and the prosecutor pulls you to the side and says, all right, you heard the man, 70-something years. But if you plead guilty, I'll ask for 20-something. Right? And so our client has to decide, do I risk dying in jail? Do I assert my constitutional right to a trial and challenge this thing and risk dying in jail? Or do I take the plea? And he takes the plea. Right? And that ends the case. And what that means is we don't get to expose any of that information, right? And in Illinois, 97.5% of felony convictions are guilty pleas, right? That's a lot of disappearing information.
How many?
97.5%. In 2017, it was 97.4% of felony convictions were guilty pleas. Only about 1 out of every 40 actually had a trial, right? And that's how people like John Burge get to do what they did for 20 years, because you can't expose patterns of misconduct if nothing makes the record. It's very hard to get things on the record. John Burge, who was a Chicago police commander who electrocuted people and tortured people and helped them get falsely convicted, and he could do that because we're not getting stuff on the record. There are processes in place or that are available to put things on the record. One is trials. We don't really do them, 1 in 40, right? The other, though, without even going to trial, is depositions. Mm-hmm. That's like getting someone on the record before the trial. And we do them in civil cases when money is on the line, but we don't do them in criminal cases when liberty's on the line. Other states do. We don't.
March 17th, 2020, huh?
Yep.
I'm ready.
Right?
Unless we do that today. Thank you for coming down.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
No, man, really, thank you. And best of luck. And I think, and I applaud Michilla and Attorney Schiller and all of your ilk for bringing this stuff out so people can see it's not just racism. It is institutionalized or organized racism on so many different levels. Now racism is like there's environmental racism, and then there's you can't have food tonight racism, and then this TV bill is going to be $6,000 racism. It's so much going on, but the idea of being able to identify it and identify a solution for it is really paramount right now. And I am so glad that you're running.
And
appreciate that.
And you've never heard any sort of conversation like this from anybody in running for office or or an actual judge or anything.
You know why? Because they run from that, because they know once people find that part out, then they're like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to have available to me, and what my taxpayer money goes for, to make sure that the jails aren't full of people who had to plead guilty so they didn't die in jail. That's insane.
Well, yeah, and judges want to be judges for life.
Forever, yeah, because, you can wear a T-shirt under that robe.
Yeah.
Get a fake shirt, tie, collar.
We're going to fix that, too.
Thanks, man, for being on.
It's my pleasure. Thanks
really
for having
appreciate it. And I don't know if you're going to stick around to hear this earth-shattering conversation
Nope, Ron, this could be
Did you say
controversial,
Ron?
and I need you to not be involved with this in any way.
No, I don't want you to. I don't want this to affect your
his candidacy. Stop.
Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much. I
Really
appreciate it.
Daniel Epstein is running for Illinois Supreme Court Justice on St. Patrick's Day. So I'm going to need you guys to do me a favor. Go vote first. I know how it goes downtown.
Yeah, how about it?
Vote first, and then kick it on St.
Daniel, how
Patrick's
do
Day.
people find you?
EpsteinForSupremeCourt.com, or on Facebook at Epstein for Supreme Court, or on Twitter at EpsteinD, on Instagram at Daniel Epstein85. We couldn't get all the same one.
Right, never.
But EpsteinForSupremeCourt.com has all that information
There's
available.
probably a million Daniel Epsteins, by the way.
It's like John Smith.
Yeah.
See, the Smith thing. Nobody
Michilla
believes it.
Blaise?
You-
All me.
Yeah, that is you.
Isn't that crazy?
There is a unique group there. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Right on. It's News from the Service Interest Radio Show. We'll take our break and come back.
And I'm going to eat my burger.
Oh, Lord. We'll come back, play a song, and then we'll talk about Lori Lightfoot's first 100 days. She gives the State of the City address tonight at 6 p.m. Central. Should be interesting. News from the Service Interest Radio Show. Oh, did it again. Did it again.
Yeah, you have to be ready.
I know.
Gosh.
Did it again.